All right. Cool. Okay. Well, hello, everybody. Oops. Did we get there? Yeah. Awesome. Okay. Welcome. Thank you so much for being here. My name is Kim Cortez, and I'm the new unit supervisor for supported employment here at HCCF. And before we dive in, I wanted to take a minute to just quickly introduce the other members of the employment team for folks who either weren't at the last meeting or haven't had a chance to meet everyone yet. Many of you know Katie. She's our team lead and the main point of contact for most of our technical assistance questions. You might also know Andre Johnson. He oversees our provider training and reimbursements. Jenny Jordan will be co-presenting with me, and she is leading our efforts to develop the new services that we're talking about today. And some of you are either part of or you may have heard about the pilot we're running for incentive-based payments for supported employment. And Lauren Riley is leading that project. So we always like to start by grounding ourselves in our mission, which is to improve healthcare equity, access, and outcomes for the people we serve while saving Coloradans money on healthcare and driving value for Colorado. And so for those of you who are not at the first meeting, our goal coming together today is to get your feedback and input on the new employment-related services that we're working on developing. Jenny is going to talk about this more in a minute, but these services are a result of Senate Bill 21039, which is a bill that came together thanks to the advocacy from many of you. And last time we provided an overview of how we've been thinking about the design of these services. And today we're hoping to build on that overview and then to continue to look for your feedback on, some of the proposed concepts we have to help direct our efforts as we prepare to submit for federal approval. And our hope today is that we can hammer out some of the more challenging details, particularly related to workplace assistance. And then in our final meeting, just as a little preview, we'll review sort of what we plan to submit for federal approval and collect any final input. And at the end of the presentation, we'll remind you of the date of that meeting. And before I sort of move on to the agenda for today, we're going to be using polls like pretty heavily in this meeting because we're very fancy. So to kick things off, we have a quick poll to get a sense of sort of who's here today and what experiences you represent. And now we're going to find out how effectively I can launch polls and talk at the same time. Here we go. Okay, this seems to be effective. So when you have a chance, go ahead and let us know sort of who you are and, where you're from, I guess. Oh, and it is still letting me go in the slides. Okay, cool. So while you're answering the poll, here's what you can expect from our meeting today. I have one more slide to talk about housekeeping, and then Jenny is going to recap sort of the background that led to this new service development. Then she's going to walk us through the first of our new services, which is benefits planning. We'll have a little bit of time for discussion. Then she's going to present on some additional detail around the way we're thinking about workplace assistance. At that point, I'm going to take over and lead us through what I hope will be a series of robust discussions about some of the questions we're really grappling with as it pertains to that service. And then we'll close by providing a few updates on other changes related to the legislation. Come on, slides. Here we go. Okay, lastly, our housekeeping. We're all pretty used to the virtual environment by now, I think, but I want to remind everyone to just please stay muted unless you're presenting or asking a question. If someone from our team notices you're not muted and there's some background noise, they may mute you just to make sure everyone can still hear us. Please feel free to use the chat to ask questions and provide comments or feedback. Jenny and I will be answering questions in the chat or sort of addressing them verbally as part of the discussion. If you'd like to ask a question verbally, please use the raise your hand feature so we can keep track of who's waiting. If you click on the reactions button on the bottom of your screen, there's an option there to raise your hand, and that will just sort of help us keep track of who's waiting. So with all of that, I'm going to end our first poll, and I think it will let me share the results just so that y'all want to see who's here. which is pretty cool. Lots of management, great. Cool, okay. So with that, I hand it over to Jenny. I want to thank you all for being here again. Your feedback and input is so important to us, and we really appreciate you being here and giving us an hour and a half out of your day.
All right. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jenny Jordan, and I'm a member of the Supported Employment Team at Healthcare Policy and Financing, or HCPA. I'm thrilled to be able to lead this new rollout for the new benefits that we have. I'm so excited to be here, and I'm excited for you to be here to really inform our work and to help us kind of figure out what we want to do with making these benefits work for the people of Colorado. So let's start with some high-level background. Next slide. So as you may know, Colorado is an employment first state. The basic premise of employment first is all people can work and should have the opportunity to work if they wish. Some people may need more support than others. And today we'll be digging into a new service that will be available for people who may have the most complex needs. In June of 2021, the legislature passed Senate Bill 21039, which championed the end of subminimum wage practices in Colorado. The legislation specifically tasked HCPA to add services that would address line-of-sight supervision and ongoing benefits counseling. The legislature set a date of 2023. Both of these services will be added to the Supported Living Services, or SLS, and the Developmental Disability, DD, waivers beginning July 1st of 2023. Next slide. So first up today is benefits planning. We will be brief, as Kim said, in this section, since we think it's pretty straightforward, and we want to reserve most of our time to dig into that workplace assistance. That said, we are really excited about getting the word out about benefits planning, so we'll touch on the basics. At the end of this section of the presentation, we will have a few questions about benefits planning for you, and we'll have time for questions, and we will have some poll questions specifically for you. Next slide. So the purpose of benefits planning is assisting members, their families, and support networks to understand how benefits may be affected by employment. Benefits could include supplemental security income, or SSI, Social Security, disability insurance, SSDI, Medicaid, Medicare, food stamps, housing assistance, and other federal, state, and local benefits. We know it is common for people to have fears about losing benefits and not understanding how they could work and keep their benefits. We hope that having someone that members and teams can turn to when they have benefits questions, that will be a big win. We are excited that benefits planning will be available to any members enrolled in the DD and SLS waivers, and they don't have to specifically be seeking employment to access the benefit. Though we are hopeful that after having a better understanding of how their benefits may be impacted by work, that they may be more inclined to explore work as an option. Next slide. So some great news is that the Division of Vocational Rehabilitation, or DVR, can cover benefits counseling now. So if you're thinking, this is just what someone I know needs, but waiting until July doesn't seem reasonable, it's probably worth checking in with DVR. If that person has an open case or their case was closed successfully, DVR may be able to cover benefits counseling for that person. It's worth a phone call or email. Benefits planning through the waiver will be available to people who do not have a job and may not be seeking employment. They can access it at any time. And this is represented by the large green half circle. We anticipate that this benefit is posed to serve a large portion of the adult intellectual and developmental disability, or IDD, population who are not working yet. As previously mentioned, we hope that this could be a natural gateway to robust conversations about employment. Benefits planning is also a service available to members who are employed. If a member is connected to DVR, then they can access benefits counseling through DVR, as reflected by the middle blue circle. That said, if DVR's response is no, or that their projected timeline does not meet the member's needs, then waiver funds can be utilized, which is reflected by the small half circle. Next slide. So as mentioned, there we go. As mentioned, we are reserving most of our time today for workplace assistance discussion. However, if you want to know more about the nuts and bolts regarding benefits planning, we encourage you to check out the recording and the slides from our first stakeholder meeting. It can be found on the supported employment section of our webpage, and benefits planning is specifically covered within the first 30 minutes. Thank you to those of you who attended that session and provided feedback. Next slide. So we want to take a pulse on what you all are thinking about benefits planning. We have a poll for you. It's got 5 questions. If you have a specific question or comment about benefits planning, you can enter them into the chat. You can raise your hand and unmute. We do welcome everyone's participation in answering the poll questions. Whether you provide direct care services, are head of an agency, provide case management, or a family member, we want to hear from you. Note there are some questions that are geared towards service providers, and for those questions, there is a not applicable option available. So please take a moment to share your thoughts. And if you've got any comments or questions, you can put them into the chat as well, or also raise your hand and let us know what you're thinking verbally.
I'm seeing some responses to the poll still coming in, Jenny, but I'm not seeing anyone with a hand raised or questions in the chat. So just let me know if you want to move forward while people keep answering, or if we should give it another minute. Totally up to you.
Maybe just give people another 20 seconds or so, and then we'll keep the poll up. So if you're still working on the poll, please continue putting your thoughts in. But knowing that we want to get a lot of ground covered with workplace assistance, I think we'll keep moving on. All right. Why don't you go ahead and advance to the next slide, Kim, and we can keep the poll running there. Thank you. All right, so again, we really appreciate your input. Well, now let's explore workplace assistance. So this is what we're currently calling the benefit that we envision will meet that line of sight service need. Next slide. So let's start with the language from the legislation. It's helpful to understand the target that has been identified for us. So Senate Bill 21039 tasked HCPF with creating options for people with line of sight supervision. Specifically, we are tasked with developing a service which provides line of sight supervision on the job as a less intensive and less expensive alternative to individual job coaching when appropriate. As mentioned previously, the legislation's primary focus was the elimination of subminimum wage. Therefore, our interpretation of members who might need line of sight supervision is broader than just those who have rights modifications. We believe that the direction to address line of sight supervision could include members who have higher supervision needs due to either needing regular behavioral interventions or having impactful medical or physical needs. Those members may not specifically have line of sight supervision listed in their service plans. Members with these sorts of needs often face systematic barriers to employment. We recognize that our system isn't currently set up to support these folks. We want to rectify this, and we want to be careful not to inadvertently require that a member's supervision level be increased in order for them to receive this service. Next slide. So while we are excited about being fairly idealized and broad in our interpretations, defining the benefit and determining where the lines are in this realm is particularly tricky. We want your input to help identify and prioritize needs. We will stop at several points during the rest of the presentation to leverage the poll function to get feedback. What we are creating here is new, and we are trailblazing. We have looked at services in other states, and while there are a few states with similar services, ours will be unique. Essentially, we are crafting something new to meet Colorado's needs. Next slide. So what are we thinking about workplace assistance? Well, we know that it will support members who have needs that are determined to be above and beyond what would typically be done by people at the work site or by a job coach on an ongoing basis. This is where we need your help. We hope to get those wheels turning and that we can further define what this service should do. The frequency and duration should be determined through a person-centered process with an emphasis on independence and inclusion. We feel strongly that not everyone with a disability should have a paid support work buddy. Having a paid staff person there watching over the member inherently accentuates their disability and differentness. It could raise unnecessary doubts about the member and their abilities, akin to, well, there must be something wrong with that person because somebody is watching them all the time. It could also lead to an alienation of the employee with a disability because it may be easier for the other employees to interact with the paid staff person rather than the person with the disability. We will get more into this concept in a moment, but I think it is important to establish a framework that relays that this will not be for everyone. And the way that the employee with a disability receives support from workplace assistance staff will be individualized and based on their unique needs. Next slide. So with that in mind, we're envisioning this service to be one-on-one, taking place primarily at the member's place of employment, either during work hours or before or after work. An example of the support before a shift could include setting up the member's workstation and ensuring that they have all that they need kind of prior to working, or potentially providing transportation. Someone receiving workplace assistance may also be receiving job coaching, or they could be completely independent in that actual job and only require workplace assistance. In cases where the member receives both job coaching and workplace assistance, these services could be provided by the same provider or agency or by different agencies. Our assumption at this time is that there would need to be a distinction as to when job coaching was delivered in relation to workplace assistance. Next slide. One of the areas we really want your help to explore is, what does the target population for this service look like, and how do we define it? Next slide. The way that our team has been thinking about who needs this service typically falls into one of these general areas. The first, members who require line of sight supervision and most likely have rights modifications, limiting alone time or access to certain possessions. This includes what the IDD system typically would consider as members who require line of sight supervision, as well as casting a slightly wider net, which we will explore on the next slides. As for the second group, we also know that there are some members who display behaviors that would cause concerns at work. The team supporting these members may have safety concerns on behalf of the member or of the community at large. These folks may not meet the criteria of line of sight supervision, or their situations wouldn't constitute having a rights modification. However, with the right job match and having support that is thoughtful and strategic, they could be really successful at work if given the opportunity. The third group includes members who have medical concerns or intensive physical needs. Perhaps they use a wheelchair or require hand-over-hand assistance. These folks might also benefit by having a paid staff member to assist when needed at work. So, with those categories in mind, we will launch another poll. We are curious who you think might most need or use workplace assistance. We will be exploring each of these areas in more depth, but wanted to get a sense of what you are currently thinking. And if you are thinking we are missing a particular group that would benefit from workplace assistance, please add your ideas into the chat. It looks like the questions from the poll are rolling in. Again, we really appreciate kind of your thoughts on where this might land in terms of where our focus might be, or how broad we want to cast this net. So thank you all so much. We might go ahead and move to the next slide, or do people need a little bit more time?
Looks like we've got answers still rolling in, but they're coming in pretty fast now. So I think seems like most people are wrapping up.
Okay. And say this all is new to us, folks. So we're excited about using the polls. Hopefully they're feeling helpful, and we get some great input and feedback from across all of you who are coming and participating today. But if you're needing more time, please let us know that. But let's go ahead and get a little bit of a deeper dive into that line of sight supervision. So we're going to take some time to explore each of the groups that we had identified. So for line of sight supervision, again, this includes members who have little to no alone time. The supervision level in their service plan may reflect line of sight, which conveys that the team believes that the member needs somebody who is responsible for them to have eyes on them at all times in that particular setting. It is likely for a member with that level of supervision to have a rights modification in place. For the sake of this discussion, we would like to include members who may not have a rights modification, but who need supervision at work to the degree that it is effectively equivalent to a kind of that constant line of sight supervision. For example, we know there might be some folks out there whose service plans reflect that staff should be watching them all of the time, except for when they're using the bathroom. Those folks would be included in this kind of line of sight group. If an individual does have a rights modification, then all of the typical protocols and practices should occur as expected, including informed consents and periodic reviews, etc. Workplace assistants would likely also have requirements about periodic reviews that ensure that the least intrusive methods are being used to meet the identified need. Now, next slide. So regarding how it might look for someone who has a rights modification at work, depending on the reason for the rights modification and the member's overall ability level, it may be possible for that member to learn and master the job after a limited period of time. Where the job coaching would traditionally fade out, workplace assistance may come into play to ensure that their supervision needs by a paid staff person are met due to those identified safety concerns. As a reminder, the premise of job coaching is that the employee with a disability may need some extra time to learn the job and may benefit from job aids or accommodations. The job coach is focused on helping the employee be successful in their work and be as independent as possible. Workplace assistance, on the other hand, is fundamentally different. It is less job and task related and more a support that makes it possible for the person to be safe at work. The workplace assistance staff would primarily be eyes on the member and may redirect or intervene as necessary. In this case, the amount of support that the member may need for job-related tasks would be essentially non-existent, and the job coach would only check in occasionally. In this sort of scenario, we anticipate that the paid staff person would commonly be on site for the full shift. Depending on the needs of the member and the related safety concerns, it may be possible for the workplace assistant support to fade or be replaced by other means. There are many exciting technological advancements being used in the field of supported employment, and there may be something that aligns with a specific member's needs or safety concerns. So we're at another point for a poll. Kim, I just wanted to check in to see if you wanted to share results from the previous poll before we launch the next one, or if we just want to start and jump in the next poll.
Yeah, I think sharing results is great. So I have just done that. You should all be able to see.
Thank you. Is there anything you wanted to highlight in what was there?
I think it looks like there was a fair amount of consensus around the groups that most sort of need and will most use the service. There were a couple of people who answered yes, that there were members that you thought might be missing from the populations we're targeting. So if that was you and you want to share sort of who you're thinking of or what groups of folks you might be thinking of in the chat, that would definitely be helpful. We don't want to be missing anyone.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Kim.
And we'll get the next poll.
Yeah, so we have another set of poll questions for you. So digging a little bit deeper again into each of those target group areas, we want to get a sense about your thoughts about this particular target group, so the line of sight. And we will have similar questions for the other groups as well. So again, we thank you for sharing your insights to help us in calibrating kind of our efforts for defining this service. So we'll give you just a moment to answer that poll. All right.
These came in pretty quick, Jenny, so if you'd like,
Awesome.
I can share this before you go on. It looks like maybe just a couple more trickling in.
Sounds great.
Right. So it definitely looks like a lot of consensus around this either being a moderate priority or the highest priority group. And of the folks here that represent providers, it seems like the majority think they're likely to provide or highly likely to provide workplace assistance for folks in this group.
Excellent. Thank you all for that insight. Again, we will have similar questions with the other groups coming up as well. Let's go ahead and go to the next slide. So now we are going to shift gears and consider the group of people who may have safety concerns and or challenging behavior, but don't want specifically or don't specifically need line of sight supervision. The behavioral or safety concerns are to the degree for these folks that the team believes that a paid staff person should be present for a portion of the member's hours worked. And the type of support needed is beyond assisting the member with just learning job-related tasks. So in essence, there is a justifiable concern that the member may need support at work that's more supervision oriented rather than needing assistance with learning the job. Next slide. In these cases, the team can identify the concerns and specify how they should be addressed at work. If the concerns are behavioral in nature, then it would make sense to draw on a behavioral provider's expertise, perhaps. A behavioral plan could be created that is specific to the work site, and the workplace assistance staff could be trained in those intervention strategies. The workplace assistance staff would then redirect or intervene as necessary. The paid staff person could be nearby or always have eyes on the member depending on what is needed. So we have another poll. It's similar to the last one, kind of posing the questions related to members who have safety concerns and challenging behaviors. So we'll go ahead and launch that now. But I might go ahead and move to the next slide because there's a lot of overlap. And so let's go ahead and post it, give you just a moment. But just know we'll keep kind of touching on this topic. Let's give a moment for you guys to read the poll. All right, so for members who need this sort of behavioral intervention or supervisory support, it's anticipated that the member would be at least fairly independent with the job tasks. Similar to what I mentioned before, the job coach would be involved with orientation and training. If the team believes that the member must have a paid caregiver present due to safety concerns, then the workplace assistance service could begin. As the job coaching fades, the workplace assistance would increase. Our hope would be that the job coaching would eventually fade to what is a typical amount. So perhaps just the job coach checking in a few times a month and maybe assisting with job or task related needs as they arise. The workplace assistance service may initially be needed for the entirety of the member's shift. However, the team member should be committed to figuring out how to help that member be as integrated and independent on their job as possible. It may take some creativity, cultivation of natural supports, and perhaps leveraging technology. Similar to those with rights modifications, we would want teams to be evaluating the actual need related to the paid staff being present and working towards a minimum necessary outcome. And we'll explore this further on some upcoming slides. But Kim, just wanted to check in on that poll question if you wanted to share it or check in about those results.
Yeah, I'll go ahead and share now. The sort of additional question for this population was sort of confirming that there's agreement that there's a need to address this group, and very strong consensus yes on that. Again, consensus that this is a high to moderate priority group of folks that need support, and maybe sort of a little bit less likely that the providers represented would provide workplace assistance to this group, but only a slight shift, I think, downward on that.
Great. Yeah, thank you all again. Let's go ahead and go to the next slide. So regarding that member's level of supervision at work, our hope is that workplace assistance could be a bridge for folks who may ultimately need less supervision and behavioral supports at work. We don't want to over support nor limit a person's opportunity to work based on staff availability, nor have supervision levels for other settings to be like automatically assumed to be needed at work. The natural supports available at a work site, such as the member's coworkers, may be more involved and engaged than those in other community settings. So they would have regular opportunities to get to know, interact with, and support the employee with a disability. So as we're thinking about supervision levels in general, remember that the work setting can and often should be treated differently than other settings. An appropriate job match can also control for many of the concerns that members and their teams may have about work. Next slide. All right, so while workplace assistance may be a longer-term support for some people, we don't want to maintain an unnecessary measures that would limit the person's interactions or their integration at work. Remember, having a paid staff person hovering may lead to the staff person being engaged rather than the member. Therefore, the team should always be checking in regarding the amount of workplace assistance needed. This will be a team effort. The team should determine the member's actual need for workplace assistance. Some factors that would be included in this equation are the nature of the job and the work location, the member's longevity with the employer, the continuity of that at that particular work site, and the likelihood of members actually putting themselves or others in harm's way. I realize that this concept may feel a bit foreign and will probably raise questions. So we do have some questions for you about what supports you may need to have in order to best understand and implement this. So please take a moment to complete that poll now.
And Jenny, while folks are answering that, I just wanted to flag that there was a comment in the chat related to sort of exactly this question of, or this concern about making sure that there's sort of a careful orchestration of fading in instances where workplace assistance can be faded. And I mentioned that, part of our goal here is to get an understanding of what support folks might need in guiding that process. So if there's anything you want to elaborate on while people are filling out, please feel free.
Sure, no, very much appreciate that. We want it to be really successful for those members, that they get the support that they need, that it can be seamless, but that we're not artificially putting people in their lives that don't need to be there. So I think it will take a lot of coordination. It'll take the team coming together and really being creative and open to the idea of where can we pull back, what can we try? And there might be times that you try and pull back and maybe it doesn't work as well. And then you have that support person right back in there. So I do think that there will be a bit of a dance with that. Any other thoughts or questions?
I have a couple more responses coming in, but it looks like we're pretty close to maxed out. If you want me to share these before we trade off.
That sounds great. Thank you.
Okay. All right, so again, just as sort of a summary of what we're seeing here, it seems like a pretty even-ish spread with a little higher group of folks who are sort of like, maybe about how to approach this. And a mix of different, somewhat equal mix, I guess, of folks who feel that the various options for support would be beneficial, which I think is helpful to know. And again, folks, please feel free, if there's something you think we're missing that would be helpful that comes to mind, please feel free to add that in the chat.
No, thank you all for this input in particular. It will help us in knowing what might we need to build out more in terms of support things, or just how much structure related to this element. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Kim, that she's going to take on that medical and physical support needs, and we'll dig in a little bit deeper. Thank you.
All right. Hi again, everyone. So the third potential sort of target population is this group with medical and physical support needs. And this is where we feel like we, especially need your help. We know that many of our members have medical or other physical support needs, and that those needs might limit their opportunities for independent employment, at least right now. And sort of what we're talking about here is folks who maybe have complex dietary needs or use mobility devices, need hand-over-hand assistance with some tasks, or need assistance with personal care. Ooh, there we go. And so I want to make sure that we're being really clear about what group we're talking about here, because all three of these sort of populations that we're discussing, we know that there are overlaps, right? So in this section here, in the questions that we're going to ask in polls and the areas where we're looking for input from you, is really about this like blue, I don't know if you guys can see my cursor. If you can, no, maybe not. This little blue section over here, which is folks that only have medical or physical support needs. So anyone who is in this like purple or representation of green area of overlap, they're already covered, right? So if you are someone who needs line of sight supervision and you also have medical or physical support needs, you would already have access to the service by virtue of that line of sight supervision requirement. So I may be overemphasizing here, but I just want to be really clear that we're talking about folks who do not have line of sight or a sort of semi-equivalent of line of sight and do not have safety concerns that would otherwise sort of catch them as eligible for workplace assistance. And what we're wondering is what about, is there a group, and if so, what are the needs of that group that only have medical or physical assistance needs? So before we like really dig in further, our sort of threshold question is like, does this group exist and how big is it? Like, are there lots and lots of people who you can think of who would need that kind of assistance or support at work, but do not meet one of these other categories? Is it just a few? Is it that there's kind of no one? And bear with me for a second, because surprise, we have a poll question about this. And what we'll sort of get into while y'all are answering this in the next couple of slides is that there are implications for the service itself if we pull this group in. So we sort of want to initially understand, like, is this group significant, or are most of the folks who have these types of support needs already captured somewhere else? All right, looks like people are answers are rolling in bit by bit. And I think while y'all are answering, I'm just gonna hop on to the next slide, just in case this sort of additional detail is helpful as you're answering this question. So for folks in that blue group, we know that their physical support needs could vary quite a bit, right? Members may need support intermittently or on a more regular or continuous basis. And my sense, at least, is that this group and the potential for more sort of sporadic support needs is where a lot of the questions around, okay, but like, how would we actually do this? Like, how would we actually provide this service come into play? And of course, our primary concern right now is how the service itself should be defined, not necessarily how to implement it in practice. But that said, I do want to acknowledge those concerns and sort of recognize that those implementation concerns might play a role in determining whether workplace assistance is the right tool to address the needs of this group. Oh, people still coming in on the poll. I was going to end it and hit share, but I think that we will give it another second. And so I'm going to pause and end the poll and share because I think it's helpful. So this is super interesting to me. It looks like in general, it's the consensus is that there is a medium-sized group. I know we didn't really quantify those things, but not small, not large. And then we've got like a nice little bell curve going. And then a handful of folks that can't think of anyone that would sort of meet that criteria. So For what it's worth, what that tells me is that this isn't a sort of outlier group that is one of the questions we've been asking ourselves is, okay, should we be focused on more of like a case-by-case solution or alternate solutions for this group? So we'll get into that more, but this is super, super helpful. Because I think we started out thinking like, this is a significant population that we need to make sure we include. And then we were sort of checking ourselves and worried we were solving a problem that maybe didn't exist. So with that, some important context, I guess, and considerations to share for this group is that for people who need physical support at work, some or all of those needs that we've been talking about might be considered personal care needs, right? And when we talk to you all, we hear how personal care needs in particular can limit opportunities for folks, often excluding them from employment completely, or if they do work, it does seem to be more commonly in a group setting where there can sort of be a constant staff presence available to support with those needs. So we know that personal care in general can be a barrier, right, for folks. And at the same time, we recognize, and our system recognizes, that personal care requires training and skill to do well and to provide effectively. And because of that, come on, slides, there we go. Personal care services may be subject to additional requirements. So I want to quick disclaimer, this slide isn't necessarily intended to be a perfect reflection of how personal care works in the waivers or how it is organized. We really just wanted to include it here to demonstrate some of the additional complications that may be present if we include this group in workplace assistance. So once you're sort of flagged as this is a personal care service, that can result in additional licensing requirements. It can require EVV, which, if you're not familiar, is electronic visit verification. So it's a bit of a can of worms that could be opened for this population specifically. And the point I really want to make here is that we don't know how CMS will view this service if we include individuals with physical support needs only in the service definition. And on our end, we're taking steps to try and talk to our federal partners and get some early feedback from them. But we wanted to take this question to all of you because it may be that you all are like, we already have those licenses, or we already do EVV, or we're not concerned about potentially having sort of additional regulatory requirements. Or you might be thinking that, yes, this group is a significant group, but is there another way that we can provide for their needs at work without sort of pulling them into workplace assistance? So what I want to understand from you all is sort of how important it is to find a solution for this population, and whether we should sort of continue down the path of pushing for workplace assistance as an option to support those folks, or if we should be taking a step back a bit for this group and evaluating and considering sort of all options that might be available for them. So I'm gonna launch a poll. This is my favorite thing. I feel like I'm doing science. It's making me very happy. Okay, so you'll notice in this poll, this is sort of mirrors many of the questions that we asked about for the other subpopulations that we've been talking about. And while that poll is running, I want to sort of pause here for a little bit more discussion on this question of this subgroup specifically, right? Folks with sort of more medical, physical, personal care type needs, and in general, if this is sort of the end of our target population discussion. So if there are other questions or feedback that you have, we'd love to talk about that now too. We've got about 10 minutes before that we have sort of allotted for conversation now before we move into our next tricky question, I would call it. And I do see that a lot, I don't have the chat open, but I see like a lot of little chat icons. So I can also pop over there, but please raise your hand. Vicki.
Hi, Kim. Yeah, I had a question. Hopefully it's the right time. I was trying to poll and chat and listen. But have you also considered the language of work assistance in terms of it potentially being confusing for people that we're supporting? Like as a professional and hearing the explanation, I certainly hear the distinct difference between work assistance and job coach, but from a perspective of anyone that might be supporting, they might say, oh, I get work assistance through my job coach. They assist me at work. Have you thought about any different language or how you might address that, any confusion there?
Yeah, great question. And there may be, people may have more thoughts about that later too. So for sure, like this isn't our only chance to talk about it, but we haven't, at least not since I joined the department, we haven't really talked much about other language, but I would be super open to thoughts and suggestions that people have. I think, and maybe Katie can speak to how we sort of originally landed on this as the draft language. I think what we were looking for was something that was broader than just line of sight supervision, right? Which is sort of how it was described in the legislation. But I don't know that we're super like married to workplace assistance. And I think that perspective of, you know, for the folks that we serve, for our members, like, is this clear? Is it a clear enough distinction, or is there sort of more appropriate language or more clear language that we could be using to describe the service? So that doesn't super answer your question, Katie, do you, but mostly it's an invitation if people have other ideas for sure for what we should call this service. Like, I would love to hear them.
And honestly, the words came from nationally, I think it was Lisa Mills who suggested that language, and we just have really appreciated working with her on numerous things. So that's really where it came from. But yeah, we're open to anything that would work better if that comes up. And Kim, I did want to just bring your attention to lots of great thoughts and conversations happening in the chat. I wasn't sure if you and Jenny wanted to talk through some of those, but it fits with Vicki's segue here, which is, you know, partially like, what's the difference? And I think what we've been talking about, what's job coaching and what's workplace assistance, as we're calling it so far, and what's the training and what are the expectations and what does the employer need to understand? So a lot of great conversation happening there.
Yeah, for sure. I would say if there's anything in there, you or Jenny, that you want to sort of flag for me to talk about verbally right now, I will say our next section after this discussion break is specifically focused on job coaching versus workplace assistance and what are the distinctions and what is the overlap. So it sounds like maybe some of that we're about to get to, which is, yes, maybe also a good segue, but I appreciate your direction. If there's something specifically it would be helpful to call out.
Yeah, there's been a lot of great comments on kind of training or the distinction between the roles, also related to it maybe being confusing to the employer of like, well, how many people are coming to this job? Yeah. And then how do we orchestrate that and what is that impact on the employer? So very much appreciate those reflections. There's also a question of like, is there no place to get this kind of data from the state? And I think, Kim, if you have anything to add to that, is like, we do have some generic sorts of things that we can look at. We all have direct experience in the field and have a sense of what's out there, but really valued this particular group's insights because we think that your values are probably in alignment with what we're striving for. So getting your brains to kind of helping us and think about how do we make this actually work instead of something that's just in concept is part of what this exercise is about, not just how many people use a wheelchair in our services. And I think the other comment just to highlight is that some people just honestly haven't thought about work yet. The system hasn't been set up to support people with maybe more ongoing work site needs. And so it is a bit of a challenge to think about those people working. And that's, we are asking you to stretch into that space a little bit.
Yeah, that was sort of going to be my, or I have a sort of related feedback on that, which is that we do have access to a fair amount of data, but we could pull more data about people who are working and who have supported employment units in their plan, or who have utilized those units over a certain time period, and then we can get additional data about who those folks are sort of in aggregate. But the intention really behind these services is to make employment more accessible to folks that currently are being excluded from the workforce. And that we don't have a mechanism really where we collect data on who would work if it felt more possible for them, right? And so that's where we're really relying on you all to make sure that the beliefs and assumptions and the information that we do have access to is accurate, it tracks your experience, right? So hopefully that is helpful. It's very weird not to be sort of super detailed monitoring the chat, but I saw Jenny in there answering. I'm sure that she was giving you all excellent support and responses. So real quick, I'll share the results of this poll. Did it share? Yes, okay, great. Sort of similar distribution in terms of priority, an interesting mix to me. I'm excited to sort of dig into this of what sort of for the providers in the group, what their experience is in providing personal care right now, and sort of what licensing you might already have. Unsurprisingly to me, a pretty significant portion of folks are whether or not they would provide workplace assistance to this group would depend on what requirements there are, which makes sense. And then we've got our what excites you most about workplace assistance sort of in general, and lots of exciting things, but the highest overall by far is the possibility of people with more intensive needs getting the support they need in a work setting, which is the part that excites me the most as well. So with that, I'm not seeing anybody else sort of queued up to talk about this specific question. So I just really want to thank you all for your feedback on this question of target population, because it has been complex and it does have repercussions, sort of who we decide is included. And so your feedback on who benefits and how important is all really, really valuable to us. So with that, the last area that we want to really spend some time with you all is around the service definition itself, and where to sort of draw the bounds around what activities do or don't belong within workplace assistance. So in general, our supported employment services have areas of handoff and overlap, right? I think that's something that most of us are fairly familiar with. For example, we might have a member who is receiving job development services through the waiver to look for a new job while they wait for DVR services. And maybe they're also receiving job coaching for their existing job. So there are these sort of natural areas of overlap where maybe a member is accessing more than one service, or you're sort of transitioning from one service to another. And so the same thing will likely be true for these new services, at least to some extent. But because of the nature of workplace assistance, and it sounds like this is exactly what you all were sort of digging into in the chat, is that there are particular questions around the overlap with job coaching And, you know, that's consistent with what we've heard from our conversations with many of you and the questions that sort of we've gotten so far about what that overlap looks like and how the services would really function together. So to start this conversation, we thought it would be helpful to do a bit of a side-by-side between job coaching and workplace assistance and what activities we consider or we would consider being under which service. So when the service provided is job coaching, the tasks and activities of someone providing that service should really be directly related to work, right? So this could include supporting with identifying and implementing modifications, providing support or training at work, teaching or developing resources to support with job tasks, and sort of supporting the overall relationship between the member and their coworkers, supervisor, the company culture, etc. In contrast, workplace assistance is really intended, at least as we're sort of conceptualizing it, to support with individual needs that happen to occur at work, right? So that could be adhering to rights modifications around line of sight. It could be providing safety-related interventions or redirection or implementing a behavior plan, which are all things that could happen anywhere and might be needed by an individual anywhere and sort of just so happen to be taking place at work. So while we're pretty clear, I think, on what kinds of activities should live sort of squarely in the green of job coaching versus the yellow of workplace assistance here, we really want your input on how much, if any, overlap there should be between the two services. And if you think there should be an overlap, what kinds of activities should be permitted under both services? So, for example, maybe assisting someone at work with following the sort of norms and expectations of their workplace, like maybe what language is appropriate, can you use your cell phone while you're at work, things like that. That's something that right now job coaches often do, right? But a similar support could be provided maybe by a workplace assistant. So these are the kinds of activities that we want to make sure that we're identifying as sort of clearly within workplace assistance, like, yes, you can be doing this and bill for this service, or sort of clearly outside of the scope of workplace assistance if it's something that we think should live squarely in job coaching. So with that in mind, we have another poll, and then we're gonna, before we sort of close with some discussion about workplace assistance generally, I'm hoping we can take some time, maybe 10 minutes or so, to talk about this question of the overlap between the two services and how you all are thinking about it, and what you would hope to see. So in my most valiant attempts ever at multitasking, this one's just one question, and it's our last poll I just discovered. So separately, at the end of this meeting, y'all should give us some feedback on, like, was it fun with the polls? Was this helpful? Or was it like being in school and having to take a test all the time? Okay, so while folks are answering, I want to open it up for discussion. Vicki, I see your hand up, so feel free to hop in.
Yeah, I wondered, I do feel like some overlap here is good, but I also wanted to suggest potentially, I know job development in your previous slide was kind of off to the side and not overlapped, but I could see maybe in very targeted circumstances where the workplace assistance professional was collaborating with the job developer to ensure that, you know, for that person being an expert, so to speak, on those personal, maybe physical and medical needs. For example, going with the job developer and the career seeker to take a tour of a potential employer to assess whether or not it's going to be a great job match for those personal needs. I could see an overlap there, and I'm sure there's probably other examples in job development as well. Yeah, and just in general with the coaching and the workplace assistance, I think having overlap that is very, very targeted and very intentional, and probably varies case by case, whether or not it's minimal or modest or things like that. Yeah.
Yeah, totally. I really appreciate you calling that out as it relates to job development, because well, I think a lot of the sort of questions and even maybe confusion about the difference between the services is closely related to job coaching. I should have said this on the slide and I didn't. I think that you're exactly right that workplace assistance could potentially overlap with a variety of services. And that graphic was more meant to be like, here's our little constellation of employment services, but not necessarily that like if there isn't an overlap in that visualization that there couldn't be. And I think it's good for us to be considering those other services like job development as we're thinking about how we are differentiating workplace assistance. Okay, so I'm gonna share the poll results. This is super helpful. Nobody said no overlap, which is good. Good? I don't know, good's the wrong answer, wrong thing to say. I guess what I mean is it seemed possible to me that folks would be like, no, I want it to be super clear cut. I want this is distinctly this service and this is distinctly this service. Overlap is messy. Or we thought maybe the feedback would be more, everything is a little fuzzy and complicated sometimes, and having flexibility about what counts as what service is helpful in order to sort of not have to be over obsessively figuring out exactly what everybody's doing every day to figure out exactly what you can or can't consider that service. So with that, you know, there's sort of a cohort that is thinking minimal, only a little, and the sort of half of you all are thinking modest overlap, and then some folks thinking moderate and up to half overlap. So I think what I would love to hear, and I see that the chat's going, so I'm going to pop that open in case there's some good stuff in here, is what goes in the overlap, right? Like as you think about these services and the way we're talking about workplace assistance and what we know about job coaching, like what activities are you thinking like this needs to live in the overlap? Because if it doesn't, it makes things hard or complicated or nonsensical.
Hey, Kim, while people are thinking about that, I did just want to mention quickly that Jennifer Biggs put in the chat similar to what you have been saying out loud. And Jennifer, I don't know if you'd want to unmute and talk more about that, but just wanted to say I think it's about the same thing.
Yeah, I was just reading to catch up on that and totally agree. Overlap is messy, but I think, and it seems like there's strong consensus in the group that that's also the reality. And so how do we define the overlap in a way that makes sure that the service is effective? No unmuting. That's A-okay. Appreciate the chat. I'm going to keep trying my sit patiently in silent skills for a minute. It's not my top 5 strengths. But I will say, as you're sort of mulling this over, again, we would love feedback now on anything coming to mind that you're like, yes, this should be in both, or be an acceptable activity under either service. And in a little bit, we'll have Jenny and I's contact information. So if you think of something later, or you're sort of vision boarding, like how you might approach this service, and you have ideas that you want to share, please send those to us. And I anticipate that in our last of these sort of stakeholder meetings, we'll be sharing whatever we've been able to put together in the meantime around like what lives in the overlap, what is a not a permissible activity under workplace assistance versus job coaching, et cetera. And so there'll be opportunity to weigh in how we're thinking about dividing things then. But again, would love your input. See in the chat, depends on reimbursement rates and training requirements, which would play into workplace assistant pay rate when you really boil it down. Totally. So I think a couple of things, and I very much apologize if this is repetitive of what was in the earlier conversation in the chat, but this is slightly an oversimplification maybe, but the way I at least have been thinking about training requirements for workplace assistant is it being sort of comparable to any other sort of direct care, direct service provider, and not the sort of enhanced training requirements that we expect for someone providing job coaching. The other thing that I wanted to mention, since you brought up rates, Amy, is that we are going to be scheduling an additional stakeholder meeting specific to rates, hopefully with our rates team. We sort of need to start with, okay, here's what we have for the service definition based on stakeholder input in order for the rates team to then engage in the process sort of more fully of developing the rate. But we also want your input very much into that analysis. So we'll be pulling that in as well, I guess, is my blurb. Tiered system for staffing in this role, interesting. We've got a minute or two more. Oh, that's not true, JK, here. I forgot, we have one more discussion slide. If there's sort of any general, if you have thoughts about the overlap, would love to hear those, but if you have other sort of thoughts, questions, concerns, feedback about workplace assistance just as a whole, please feel free to chime in with those now too. Yeah, okay, so for those of you, if you don't see the chat, there's a conversation around sort of tiered levels of support perhaps, and the difference between someone who maybe always needs assistance at work and there isn't really going to be fading, and you know, maybe that's because that person has line of sight, right? And so that person, they're going to have someone with them that the training expected might be less than someone who is going to be providing more of a sort of like initial support and fading it down, things like that. Might need someone that has more skills or more training. I can't decide if it's good or bad that everyone's really quiet. Did we like all the polls, yes or no? Was it too much or was it inclusive way to get feedback? Nothing, not even thumbs up or thumbs down emojis. Lee. I see your hand up.
Yeah, so I was trying to think through this in a few different ways. And I think that one of the ways that I might look at workplace expectation, the workplace assistance is, can the materials for the client that we're serving on site be given? Can someone show up and read them and be like, okay, I get what this person needs to have the support they need to do their job. A job coach is generally helping figure out the job part of that and may have a more of a space of trying to negotiate those things. And I think the job coach is the one who tends to make those negotiations. I would expect someone that I was sending in to do workplace assistance could, for the most part, pick up whatever's being asked of them with general training, rather than specific to what has been negotiated related to the job tasks or the work environment. And anything that needed to be changed, then that would fall back in that middle ground of going back to the job coach to say, hey, we need to talk about, is it something that they can do with their task? Actually, one of the things that someone mentioned earlier was hand over hand assistance. And I was like, I don't know if I would want to negotiate a job that required someone to be present to do hand over hand assistance, because that to me does not sound like that's a job, or a task, I should say, that the person should do. So I'm kind of thinking of it, is it job related, or is it related to the individual's needs that don't have to do with the function of the job? And so that's kind of the way I was thinking about it.
Yeah, I really appreciate that, because I think something that we I don't know, I guess maybe are trying to figure out sort of the right way to talk about, or the right way to support folks in thinking about and working through is the role of job match in all of this, right? Because those two things can be separate. There may be needs that an individual has because their support needs that they have sort of in any setting, in any environment, but the right job match can control for lots of factors, I think, whether they are the amount of physical support or assistance someone needs, safety concerns, behavioral concerns, health concerns even. It can be quite a bit of, it's like more upfront work, right? And more sort of the magic and expertise of really effective discovery and job development. But we're sort of trying to split the difference of making sure that workplace assistance is available as a resource for the kinds of supports that are needed, sort of regardless of the quality of the job match, while also continuing to promote that, exactly like you said, if someone's going to need ongoing hand over hand, like maybe this isn't the right job for them, right? Okay, data over the time, person specific. Yeah, and I am really grateful to everyone's feedback about the polls. We were sort of like, we think it's cool. We really want that sort of like broader input. Hopefully it doesn't feel, I don't know, too awkward. And our technical expertise was better than I expected. I think we did pretty okay for all being newbies to launching polls versus participating in polls. All right. Oh, Vicki, yeah, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. I just wanted to share in general. I really appreciate that fading back of like line of sight support or whatever support the case may be. Like, I really appreciate that that's top of mind for developing these services. Just my personal experience, limited as it is with line of sight, has always been very rigid. Like, nope, this person's got line of sight, they're on it for life. No wiggle room, and it's always been a fight to really advocate for that person for fading back. So I'm just so excited to see that that's something that, yes, maybe line of sight is meaningful right now, but it doesn't always have to be something that a person is. Sometimes it can become a barrier itself.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for flagging and highlighting that. Also loving that Anne's grandson is participating. Welcome. We appreciate your input. All right, cool. Well, I am gonna move on to just our last couple of closing slides. If I can get here we go. All right. So just with our last few minutes, want to share a few reminders about sort of the other changes and our meetings upcoming. Come on, go. Yes, okay, so we shared this slide last time. It's still exciting news, even if it's getting to be maybe less news and more just reminder. The buy-in program for the developmental disabilities waiver should be in effect January 1 of 2023, which is super exciting. I think we're all familiar with how much the risk of losing the waiver is a barrier for folks who get services through the developmental disabilities waiver. And then in addition, the other part that our team is working on is removing supported employment services from the service plan authorization limits, or the SPAL, in the SLS waiver. That'll be as of July 1, 2023. And I don't think anybody had this question this time, but just for clarification, right now we're interpreting supported employment services as inclusive of these new services. So it would be in what we're going to be requesting, at least in terms of an amendment, is that individual job coaching, individual job development, the new benefits planning, and the workplace assistance services all be outside of this fall. Whoop, there we go. Okay, upcoming meetings. So we have our third meeting, November 10th. That is intended at least to be our final meeting around the sort of substantive service development for these services. Almost immediately after that, we'll be actually sort of submitting our waiver amendment requests and things. So our plan again for that meeting is to really lay out, okay, like we've had these meetings, we've gotten your input, and here's what we're thinking, any final changes or concerns that we need to be thinking about. And then as I mentioned, we're working with our rates team to schedule a rate specific stakeholder meeting. So please watch for that announcement in Mr. John Barry's newsletters. And we should, I think, have that scheduled by the next meeting. So we'll share that date then as well. Here is Jenny and I's contact information. Feel free to jot that down if you want to be able to send us thoughts and things later. Slides again will be posted along with the recording on our website, our supported employment website. And with just barely 1 minute to spare, if there's any other questions you want to chime in with at the last minute, we're happy to answer them. Otherwise,
Hey, Kim, there was one more in
one
the,
more.
sorry.
Yeah.
One more in the chat about transportation needs.
Oh God. Oh, sorry. Any hope? That's the right. Yes. I think this is a little off the cuff, so we'll see how this goes. But we've had a number of questions recently around the use of non-medical transportation for accessing supported employment. So it's sort of somewhat recently come to our attention that there's a lot of confusion about when you can and cannot utilize that service. So something that we want to do is figure out how to more widely spread information about the availability of non-medical transportation to support employment, because the sort of short-ish answer that I will hopefully articulate correctly is that if someone has an individual job and they have job coaching in their plan, they can use non-medical transportation to get to work. If they do not have job coaching in their plan, they can still use non-medical transportation to get to work. The only caveat in both of those scenarios is that there can't be sort of like other available resources. And other available resources might be personal funds. That seems very unlikely to me personally, or natural supports that are available. Like, I don't know, if someone's working in the same building as a family member who can like give them a ride, then no, but we know that that's very rarely the case, right? So in most circumstances, non-medical transportation is still available, even for individual employment. I recognize that sort of like finding someone to actually provide the transportation and et cetera is like a whole another barrier, but at least in terms of access to the service, I think that service is more accessible than people realize. But a great question. All right. Thank you all. Thank you for staying 1 minute late. And appreciate you, and see hopefully many of you on November 10th. Mm-hmm.